Hey everyone, I'm at my house today. I know some of these videos, I'm not recording them in order too, so I'm trying to make sure I don't say something on one that you're like, I haven't watched that video yet. I'm kind of recording this out of order just depending on like what kind of works best with my schedule. So I'll try to keep it clear. But yeah, some of these videos you'll see the lab in the background, some of them you'll see like, I'm in like one of the rooms of my home and I have this nice like kind of Darwin background. It's kind of fun. So today we're going to be talking about genetics. Now, with this PowerPoint and maybe the next one and maybe the one after that, depends on what order, I might end up pulling out the whiteboard a little bit. If I record in the classroom with a whiteboard, I feel like I can't really, like I could show you real close right here, right? So whether I pull it out on this one or another one or something, well, I think it's a little better, works a little better, but obviously you're going to be following along in the PowerPoint. So let's jump right in. So, gosh, the first PowerPoint slide is the cell. I mean, you guys know what a cell is, right? You don't really need to know much more than, we have a lot of there are like, well, one, there are two types, right? Which I think I have on, oh yeah, go to the slide that says cell types, right? It's like the third slide, and that's fine. So this is the important part. Two types of cells in the body: somatic or body cells, and or gametes or sex cells. So these are the two things I'd want you to know the difference for. So body cells or somatic cells, just as it implies, are just the cells that make up your body, like your skin or your liver, whatever, right? But your gametes, your sex cells, so sperm and ova, those are very different than just your regular body cells, right? And so those are the ones we're going to focus a little bit on for this class. And I'm assuming most of you understand, male sperm, female ova, or you could say egg, because we are a sexually reproducing species, male, female, right? And also, I mentioned this in one of the other PowerPoints, or one of the other lectures, but I'll say it in this one too. So a lot of the scenarios we talk about in this class are going to be, heterosexual scenarios. Obviously, when we're talking about evolution and reproduction, this implies a male and a female. But some of the conversations that we get into in this class a little bit, and especially maybe in like the cultural course, or even just the bio lecture, when we talk about, attraction or sexual selection, we can get into, beyond just heterosexual scenarios, right? But when we're strictly talking about reproduction, obviously, hopefully, there's no surprise. It makes sense that we're, talking about heterosexual scenarios. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So some terms we're going to be using. Hopefully you understand in general, what some of these terms mean. You might have heard them before. So here we are on this slide. It's chromosomes. And you can see per the image, sometimes depending on, these chromosomes, what process they're in, they could be, single or paired up. They will be at this, different stages in like mitosis and meiosis, basically different processes these chromosomes go through. They might be paired or not paired, right? And every species has its own number. Some species might have, 15 pairs of chromosomes. Humans, we have 23 pairs. You might have a species that has 32 pairs. It's just going to be different, for every species. So this is where the DNA is located. So usually we're used to seeing like the DNA in that like double helix kind of, curly Q structure. And imagine you made that really, really tight and you compacted and you like zoomed out. Now it's going to form basically shapes in the form of these chromosomes, right? And whether it's chromosome 1 or 5 or 9, they're going to have a slightly different structure, and the genetic information on them is going to be a little bit different, right? So let's move on to the next slide. Oh, I kind of already said this, but so the thread-like material is called chromatin. I'm probably not even going to ask you that, but you can kind of see the visual of what that would look like, so that's kind of cool. Next slide. Chromosomes and alleles. So this is a very good image to show how to kind of differentiate between these two things. So if we go through the bullet points on this slide, you'll see, like I already mentioned, humans, like in our normal body cells, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Also, hopefully it makes sense to you that 23 pair and 46 single, it's like that's the same number, right? Because sometimes depending on what process we're talking about, sometimes they're single, sometimes they're paired, but 23 pairs and 46 single is the same number. I hope you understand that's the same number, right? So when these do pair up, we call them like homologous pairs. I probably won't even mention that again. That's fine. And so here you can see on this image, it's showing a couple different chromosomes, right? And it's showing like they're in pairs, and then it's showing that there are highlighted areas on either of them where there's kind of showing like a color, like an area that's colored, right? So this is referencing this concept of an allele. That allele, so let me back up. a gene and an allele. So really simply, on a chromosome, so you've got all the DNA, right? DNA, it's compacted and compacted and compacted to make these shapes we call chromosomes, right? You have multiple chromosomes in any given cell, whether you're a frog or a rabbit or human, right? Now, we're looking at these different chromosomes. We could say, okay, here's this, like this little area of the chromosome, like the bottom left or whatever, the middle, something. That is a package of information. We've given it the name a gene, right? We say that's a gene. It's a package of information that codes for, hair color, eye color, genetics are pretty complex, right? But we can talk about it in simple terms for this class, right? So you could say, okay, there in that literal physical area of that chromosome, that's a gene. That's a package of information that is coding for a trait or a behavior or something. Given that we know that chromosomes come in pairs, the term allele references that there are going to be two of them. Now you could have, let's say, I'll just draw you a little picture. I can use my whiteboard, right? So let's say we're like, okay, here, let me see, this is gonna work. Here is one chromosome. Let me see if I can, this is gonna be challenging, guys. Okay, let me see, maybe because I'm right-handed, I need to do it this way. Oh, that's much better, okay. So here's one chromosome, here's another, like they're pairs of chromosomes, right? We could say, okay, here on this section, that's a gene, right? And then we could say, oh, there's the same gene on the other of the pair, right? But an allele references that these two, although they are the same trait, like they're both coding for eye color or hair color or whatever, that they can be different. They could be the same, but they could also be different. So let's say, like I said, kind of simplifying a lot of genetics, but let's say this area, I'm getting a little glare, sorry, this area of that chromosome, this gene is coding for hair color. We could say, oh, this chromosome says that person's going to have purple hair. Well, this chromosome says that person's going to have red hair. But what are you actually going to see on the outside? This is when we get into concepts like whether something is dominant or recessive. Sometimes one trait, one version of a trait, one allele will kind of mask the other, right? But this idea hopefully makes sense to you. Chromosomes come in pairs. So even though this gene is like the same gene in terms of it's coding for the same trait, like eye color, hair color, nose shape, whatever, there can be versions of it because they're always in pairs. The versions can be the same. It could be purple hair, or it could be different purple hair, red hair, whatever. And some traits genetically are very complex. Some are pretty simple, right? Some of the simple ones we actually call Mendelian traits after Gregor Mendel, which we will talk about. Okay. Hopefully get to use that whiteboard again. That was a little bit of a learning curve for all of us. Okay, if you go to the next slide, you'll see what's called a karyotype. So this is just a visual representation of the chromosomes for any given species. This one, it's showing it's for humans. And if you look at the 23rd pair, they're not labeled as 23, but it's the 23rd pair. You see an X and a Y. So this is letting you know this is a male human. You can see also, as kind of a side note, you can see the X is very well developed and the Y is not. This is because thinking of terms of like deeper life, evolutionarily in deeper time, before sexual reproduction, like male and a female, animals were asexual reproducers. So there are still a few species that are alive today that still reproduce asexually. Basically, they're females and they just make copies of themselves, right? So it used to just be that way. I mean, there's a little more detail than just that, right? But once males are introduced, we become sexually reproducing species. Pros and cons, the reasons why this happened. A lot of pros, a lot of cons. In fact, in the lecture, we would get into this a lot more. But just so you know, if you're wondering, why does one of the sex chromosomes it looks very developed and stuff? It's because it's been around a lot longer. Okay, next slide. So kind of referencing what I was just saying, so the sex cells, we call them the 23rd pair, but we're putting them in a random order we've picked. They could have been the second pair. It doesn't really matter, right? We've labeled them, oh, that's the 23rd one, whatever. And you can see here in this image, of course, again, that the X is very developed and the Y is really not. Now, why are they called X and Y? The X kind of looks like a squished X. The Y doesn't look like anything. We could have named them H and O or A and B, like it doesn't really matter. And you can see here on the bullet points on this slide, females XX, males XY, of course. There are sometimes interesting like statistical outliers, or maybe someone's born with like an extra X or something like that. Usually when this happens, it depends on what type it is, but it can be like neutral, like it wouldn't really present in any particular way, or it might present developmentally. It might change something about how the individual will develop or not. Like there's just different variations of how those occur. Oftentimes though, they will still present as either male or female, like for the most part, right? Let's see, did I reset that? Okay, next slide. So we're going to talk about cell division. Two types, mitosis and meiosis. You're thinking, this is like biology stuff. This is not what I signed up for. I'm gonna give you like the literal, like, most simplified version of this. And if you've ever taken a biology course, you're gonna think, wow, she oversimplified that. That's fine, because for the purposes of this class, you just need to understand some of the basic ideas, and I'll just walk you through a couple of the steps, right? We could spend all day just talking about meiosis or mitosis, right? I'm gonna give you the simple breakdown. So mitosis and meiosis, you'll see that the next two slides are kind of wordy. Now that's just for your reference later. Really the most important part of the two lines at the bottom, so for this we're talking about mitosis, and in mitosis it says here, the cell begins diploid and ends diploid, and you'll see the other slide, or the other line tells you what diploid means. Diploid is the total number of chromosomes that an individual or like that species will have. So for humans, the total number of chromosomes is 46 chromosomes, right? 23 pair of 46 total, right? So for a human, that's our diploid number. Now you take a normal body cell, and this is, let me erase my board. And like I said, I'm going to oversimplify this process. That's fine though. So what we have get this right again. Okay. So in mitosis, we're going to start with a normal body cell. Basically, mitosis is what happens for general growth and repair in your body. You stub your toe, you break a little skin, the body needs to create more skin. You break a bone, the body needs to create more bone, right? Like, you're growing as an individual, you're getting bigger, your body's going to be creating more cells because you're getting bigger. So general growth and repair. So you're going to start with a normal body cell that has the diploid number, right? So here's our cell, let's see, it's got some chromosomes in there, whatever. And it's got, 46 single, we're 23, 23 double. So that's, is it flipping? Oh, I just thought about that. I wonder if it's flipping it for you guys. Maybe it flips it back. Does that make me sound like an idiot? I don't know. Well, we're going to figure this out. That's fine, whatever I doodle. This is the important part anyway. Like I said, oversimplification, but basically what happens is there's this process called self-replication. So basically the DNA makes a copy of itself, and what ends up happening is this cell that only had, like, say, 46 single or 23 double, now has, even more than that. So now we've got even more. The DNA has made a copy of itself. There's a bunch more DNA and chromosomes in this one cell than normally would happen. So now I'm trying to get that glare off. So now you've got 46 double, right? 46 double. And then the last step is now you split that cell into two daughter cells, who then now have, back to 46 single in each. Oh gosh, this is way sloppier than I would intend. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys, right? Normal body cell, start out with normal body cell. We need to make more for general growth and repair. DNA makes a copy of itself, so there's double the amount of DNA or double the amount of chromosomes in this cell. It splits into two, and then at the end, you get two cells that have the diploid number. 46 single, 46 double, 46 single, and 46 single. Does that make sense, right? So if I asked on the exam, let's say a true-false, like in mitosis, the cell begins diploid and ends diploid, you're going to know, oh, that's true, right? Diploid is the total number, and in mitosis, it's just about making more of itself, right? So you're going to have the same number from the beginning and then at the end. It's pretty easy to remember that one. The next slide is meiosis, so slightly different. So this is the process for creating sex cells. So if you're, male or female, they're going to be a little different, right? So these are going to be a bit different than how the body cells look like. But the process is kind of similar. There's kind of just like one extra step. Let's pick a different pen color. Okay. So once again, let me see if I can make this like readable for everyone. I won't even draw, I'll draw, I won't write any words because apparently I can't do that and talk at the same time. Okay, so once again, we're going to start with a body cell. So here we have a body cell, regular body cell, 46, I'll just do that, 46 single, right? Normal body cell. Similar to mitosis, meiosis kind of follows the same step. Now you could say, well, I've taken a bio course and I know it's a little different, like the sub-steps A, B, and C are a bit, that's true, right? There's a little bit of a difference between kind of what goes on in between a lot of these steps, but the general, like if the overview that I kind of want you to know, like this is totally fine. So we start out with a normal body cell, then we get, self-replication, the DNA makes a copy of itself, so now we have double the amount, we have 46 double. And then similar to mitosis, this one splits. We get 2 cells that now have, 46 single chromosomes. And this is where it's different. In meiosis, we have one more step. So now these split again, and we end up with 4, what we call daughter cells. And these ones all have 23 single. So this is the half number, right? And you'll see on this slide, that's what it's referencing, the haploid number. In meiosis, the cell begins diploid. Diploid is the total number that we as humans or any other species would have for their chromosomes, right? We have 46 single chromosomes throughout the process at the end, but it ends haploid. It ends with half the number that you would find in any other type of cell in the body. The gametes only have half the number. Now, hopefully, this is intuitive to you guys and logical that this is because that the gametes, the sex cells, you only need 50% and 50% from, the male and the female to then create offspring. So this is that whole process, right? Mitosis versus meiosis for growth and repair, making cells, or making cells for reproduction. Diploid to diploid, diploid to haploid. Like that's the thing I want you to kind of remember, not whether they were single or double or they were intertwined or there's a bunch of other little steps. It's totally fine not to know that just right now. That's fine. Okay, so moving on, and then you'll see on the next slide is actually a visual kind of what I doodled for you, but another nice, very simple side by side of the exact thing. So you understand. Oh, starts out with a normal body cell for both of them, but the end result is something a little bit different. Oh yeah, the next slide, recombination. This just kind of gets into like I said, some of those little sub steps and things that happen. It's really not important. You can kind of read that slide if you want to talk about like recombination and crossing over. Basically what this is just saying is during this whole process of, DNA replicating and all these other things, sometimes, the chromosomes swap info and this just allows for there to be more variation, when you have offspring. That's it. This is not an intro to bio course, right? Okay, so the next slide, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Obviously we say DNA, right? And so you can see usually we see it in that kind of that double helix kind of twirly structure. Here the image is showing it's like if you flatten it out, so you'll see there's like a phosphate, a sugar, and a base. That's what this DNA is made up of. And there are very specific rules as to how they pair up. And so you'll see this on the next slide. If you move to the next slide, the base pairs. So there are 4: adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. You could just use AGCT. Like I said, for this class, it's a short class, right? Some of the stuff I might get into in the larger, 16-week course in this class, I'm probably not going to cover every single little thing, right? There are a couple things that I might kind of be a little more loose with how deep we get into them. That no surprise, right? So this one we really didn't get into too much in the regular semester. So I would say for this, like say, what does she want us to know about DNA? Maybe something simple like on the exam, like, A always, adenine always pairs with thymine, true or false, something like that. You would know in general those 2 simple rules. A is always with T and G is always with C. Now, when we talked about, I recorded that lecture before, you haven't probably watched it yet, but the forces of evolution goes into sometimes mutations happen where those base pairs might not work the right way. But this is like when everything's, going correctly. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Functions of DNA. We could spend, and trust me, I used to do this with classes. We could go into a lot, right? These processes are very, very specific. There are so many little details. It's not really important to the larger ideas and concepts I want you to know for this class, but I can just kind of skim. These are here for your reference if you want to, look at this. But just so you know, so the first thing, self-replication, and the next one is protein synthesis. So self-replication is kind of shown on this first slide. That's pretty simple. So self-replication, like I've already mentioned before, like in this process, like when the DNA was making a copy of itself, that's what that is. So basically, the DNA makes a copy of itself, and then, the cells split, whether it's mitosis or meiosis. So you can see a really good visual of basically how that happens. The DNA unwinds, and then basically free nucleotides that are in the nucleus of the cell pair up with it. So you go from 1 to 2. It's really, really simple. This visual is a really good visual. Next slide, though, really the next 4 slides, it's showing protein synthesis. It's very complex, right? There's like tRNA and mRNA, and there's like, let me see, ribosomes and peptide. We're not going to do that for this class. Usually I kind of skim over that anyway. Definitely for this 4 week we will. Just know, like I said, the 2 things like DNA functions, self-replication is one, and protein synthesis is another that could easily be like a true-false question, right? The larger concepts that I want you to know are not, like I said, this is not an intro to bio course. I'm not going to make you draw a diagram of mitosis, right? I want you to understand some larger concepts and different concepts. So, but this is a good overview for some of this, so we understand kind of following from this when we talk about things that are heritable, like things that are passed down, and how that happens. We need a kind of a baseline for that. Okay. So skip through a couple slides. Oops, my PowerPoint's doing something weird. Oh, okay, that was kind of it, right? So the last few slides were strictly about that protein synthesis process, like I said, which we won't really get into. Oh, this one's a little bit shorter. That's good. Okay, so that was the PowerPoint on genetics. Like I said, hopefully what you took away from this one was just a general understanding of, certain cells are created sometimes for general growth and repair. Sometimes cells are created like for sex cells for reproduction. What's a gene? What's an allele? Like some of those basic ideas. Right? We're gonna carry with those into the next few topics. Okay. See you guys on the next one.